Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my February wrap-up. In February, I read, I think, 8 things. 3 of them were graphic novels. I had 1 DNF. It was kind of a weird, reading month because I didn't read, anything in the first half of the month. I started a new job in February, and starting a new job is always very, it's a lot. It can be very exhausting. It very much takes up my whole brain space, and I don't always have a lot of mental or emotional bandwidth to dedicate towards reading, because I kind of it's very all consuming to start a new job, at least for me. So first half of the month, didn't really read anything. Second half of the month, I started reading again. So let's just get into it. My 1 DNF for the month is The Forever Queen by Helen Hollick. I got pretty far into this. I got 45% of the way into this before DNFing it. I really thought that I was going to finish this book because it's not like I hated it. I didn't DNF it because I was like, this is terrible. What ended up happening is that when I started this at the beginning of the month, I was super in the mood for this because I was coming off of reading the Bold duology, Widow Queen and The Last Crown, and I really enjoyed those. I was very much in the mood for those, and I wanted something that was in a very similar vein, so I picked this up. But then, you know, because of starting a new job, I kind of put it down and just didn't read anything for a couple of weeks, and by the time I felt like I had the energy and mental space to read again, I was not in the mood for this anymore. And I could potentially put it down and come back to it a later time, but I really don't think that that's going to happen. It's the kind of thing that I have to really be in the mood for it in order to enjoy it. And I just don't foresee me being in the mood for this again in the near future, which means I would have to reread it, or reread the first half in the future. It was very okay, and it was good when I was really in the mood for it, but since I'm not, I just don't feel like it's going to be worth the effort, and I'm just gonna DNF it. That's my reasoning. Okay, that was the 1 DNF. This also was my 1 book that I read from my TBR shelf clear out project, and so far I'm 2 for 2 DNFing the books from that, which I guess is not super surprising because they're all books that I have been putting off, but oh well. Okay, so then getting into what I actually completed, we'll talk about the graphic novels that I read. So first was Yvain by M.T. Anderson. I read another graphic novel by M.T. Anderson last year, the year before. It was The Daughters of Ys, and I really enjoyed that. And I think this is his first graphic novel that he did. And I enjoyed this one less. This is really just a graphic novelization of the story of Yvain, who was one of King Arthur's knights. I'm not super familiar with Yvain's story. I kind of looked up a little bit about it after reading this. And from what I can tell, he really sticks very closely to the story. It doesn't seem like this is a retelling that kind of changes or updates. And honestly, I feel like it probably could have used a little bit of updating. There are things about this that, one, I'm like, if I had been more familiar with the source material, maybe I would have enjoyed this more, partially just because I would have known what to expect going into it. But I think, you know, it very much feels like a very classic Arthurian tale, and there are things about it, especially the ending and the way that the romance goes in this, that I don't feel like translates super well to a modern audience, or maybe it just didn't translate well to me. But I just really did not I didn't think the story was that engaging, and I felt like the ending I was just very unhappy with. So not really a fan. Then, though, I did read 2 other graphic novels. I read these actually at different times because I read one at the beginning of the month and one at the end, but we'll just talk about them together. But I read volumes 1 and 2 of Sleepless by Sarah Vaughan, Leila Del Duca, Alison Sala, and Darren Bennett. So I think this is the whole series. I think it's only 2 volumes. But I found this, I actually ended up finding both of these because I was looking for books or graphic novels that had very medieval knight vibes to them, so that's kind of how I came around to this. And this is more so like what I wanted, because one, the artwork in this is beautiful. Like the artwork on the inside looks very much like the cover art, which I always appreciated. I always get annoyed when a graphic novel has like beautiful cover art and then the art that you actually read on the inside is like ugly. But this is, let me see if I can find like a good example. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but the artwork on the inside is also beautiful, which is part of what drew me to this. But in this, we are following Lady Poppy, who is the daughter of the king, but at the beginning of the story, her father, the king, has died, and that kind of throws her into the situation of not really sure like what she's supposed to do. She wants to leave court and live a more normal life, but I think, is it her uncle? Whoever it is that has become the new king wants to keep her at court in order to keep an eye on her, control her, and use her, potentially do like a political marriage, that kind of thing. And so there's that tension. But then someone starts trying to assassinate her. And so then there's trying to figure out like who could be trying to assassinate her. She has a guard who is one of the Sleepless order, which are these knights who take a vow that is, I'm assuming, it's never really explained, but it's some kind of magical vow that keeps them from ever sleeping so that they can guard 24/7. And she's very close with her guard, and they do have a little bit of a romance. That's him on the cover. But I really enjoyed these. I thought these were just like, the only thing I guess, my only like, not criticism, but like what I would have wanted that it didn't do is I just wanted more. Like I wish that there were more volumes of this. If any more are ever published, I would read them, but I'm pretty sure the story is complete and I don't think that there are going to be more of these. But I enjoyed the characters. I liked the tension between the two main characters and their relationship. The artwork was beautiful. I had a really good time with these. Okay. Then from there, I listened to an audiobook. I had a lot of audiobooks this month. I listened to A Sorcerers Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This is her standalone that has like a companion novella that is about magical books, magical grimoires. Our main character in this is training at a library that houses these magical grimoires. When there is a magical attack on the library, she gets involved in the fight, and then she is taken off to the city to be tried, I guess, to find out if she is guilty of being like conspiring in the attack, or if she was a hero who prevented anything worse from happening. And then while she is in the city, she discovers more conspiracies that are going on that could impact everybody. She also encounters a sorcerer, and he has his demon manservant who is bound to him. And there is, of course, a romance between our main character and the sorcerer as they work together to like uncover these mysteries. So I originally picked this one up because I had heard somebody say that it gave them kind of Howl's Moving Castle vibes, and I wanted to see if that was true, and I sort of agree. I don't know if I would have come to that conclusion on my own, but because someone else said it, I was like, I can see it, like especially with like the vibes of the sorcerer character and the demon that is bound to him, and like the demon like is his servant but also is like, if you let me free, I'm gonna kill you. But he's like a very dutiful servant, and so I don't know, there's just something about the vibes that I'm like, yeah, I can see it kind of having a Howl's Moving Castle feel to it. And that was really what got me to read this, because I had previously read An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, and I was not a big fan of it, so I wasn't really planning to ever read anything else from her. But I have heard from some people that most people are either like a Enchantment of Ravens fan or a Sorcerers Thorns fan. Like, most people don't like both. They're usually one or the other. And I think I am a Sorcerers Thorns person because I definitely did enjoy a Sorcerers Thorns. I just thought it was very fun. I enjoyed the characters. I liked the mystery element to it. It's not one that I am necessarily going to like really think about a lot in the future, but I had a really good time reading it. And then after that, I also listened to the companion novella, which is Mysteries of Thorn Manor, which is much more like slice of life, just kind of catching up with the characters after the events of the first book, and as they are dealing with a magical house, which also kind of like, if you like the magical house elements of Howl's Moving Castle, like I can see that kind of coming out in the novella, because the house has opinions. It has been infused with the magic and personalities of generations from the Sorcerers family, and some of those opinions come out. So I had a really fun time reading that as well. I gave both of them 4 stars. I think a real theme that I had this month in my reading was a lot of books that, like, they weren't necessarily things that I'm going to think about a lot in the future, but I really enjoyed them. Like, they were really fun at the time, but not necessarily things that are going to stick with me long term, because the next thing that I read was that I binged through a whole trilogy, which was the Regency fairy tales trilogy. The first one is Half a Soul. So these have been really like going around BookTube recently, and I decided to pick them up. I kind of picked them up because after reading A Sorcery of Thorns, I was in the mood for something kind of similar, and like, they're different for sure. You know, they're kind of set in different like historical fantasy kind of time periods, and also Have a Soul is definitely much more of a romance. But there's something about them that felt very similar to me, this sort of like historical fantasy setting that had a lot about like society and propriety and all of that. And there is like a sorcerer character, the royal sorcerer. So anyways, I dove into that trilogy. And all of these I had a really fun time with. So the first one is Half a Soul, where we are following Dora, who, because of a deal gone wrong that her mother made years ago, half of Dora's soul is stolen from her by a fairy, and so she is left with she has sort of dulled emotions. Not that she doesn't have emotions, but they're not as like strong, or it takes her a little while to figure out how she's feeling. She can be very like blunt and direct, and she sometimes does things that are considered improper, but she doesn't always care, because like a lot of times she's like, but it would be so much more straightforward if I could just do this. She then ends up going to the city for like this season so that her cousin can find a match, and while they're there she encounters the royal sorcerer, who is known for being a very angry, prickly person who's very off-putting to a lot of people, but he's not so off-putting to Dora. And then they discover a mystery going on, of a mystery illness among children that they are trying to solve. And I had a really fun time with this one. I gave it 4 stars, and there are things that like I can't explain because it would be spoilers, but there are a lot of things about like nuances to the characters and certain things about the relationships that I really liked, and especially about the ending that I liked as well. I wish I could be less vague, but I feel like it would be spoilers. Then, of course, there's the second book, which is 10,000 Stitches. In this one, we are following a girl who is a maid in like a noble household, and she kind of accidentally gets a fairy godfather. There is a fairy character that we meet in the first book who's fascinated with humans and wants to engage with them more, and so he finds her and decides to help her. And so they strike a deal. However, his help is not always that helpful, because he doesn't really understand like what makes sense to fairies doesn't make sense to humans. And so it is about her trying to change her life in a very short period of time, especially by winning the affections of a noble lord. The thing that I thought was fun about this one in particular is that the person who is the love interest in the story actually surprised me, partially because of the way that he's written and partially because of the voice that the narrator did, because there's something about his character that just much more gave like side character vibes, not main love interest vibes. He's a little bit of like he's like a very enthusiastic, a little bit silly kind of character. And then the voice that the narrator did, again, was the type of voice that I feel like would normally be given to sort of like a goofy sidekick character, but I really liked him. I liked his character a lot, and I enjoyed their dynamic, so that was very fun. And then the third book is, what is the third one called? Long Shadow. And so in Long Shadow, we are following the child of one of the characters from an earlier book, when she is trying to solve another mystery. There are girls who are dying and disappearing. There are also some fairies who are disappearing as well, and so she's trying to figure out like what is the connection between all of these, and she has to get more involved in like society's goings on in order to track down who it is that is killing these like noble women. Along the way, there is also a sapphic romance, which is very like slow burn, which was very fun, and there's a little bit of death magic in this one. This final book, I especially loved just like the last couple lines of the book. There's something about like the way that it sort of wrapped things up in those last couple lines that I just really liked. So I don't know if I was saying the ratings for any of these books, but I gave all of them 4 stars. They were very fun to read. There were things that I really loved about each of them. I enjoyed all of like the main characters and the love interests and the dynamics that they had. I think that the story, like the plots that were there and the mysteries that they had were interesting. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about this, that I think there's like a kind of overarching theme to the series, especially in the first 2 books, maybe less so in the third one, but there's this real theme of like righteous anger and the importance of getting angry about things that are unjust. And so I just thought that was a really great theme to have woven into this book, this series, that they are very like just fun, cozy fantasy romance, but it also had this like interesting theme about like justice and righteous anger. So I really enjoyed that as well. So it was a really fun series. I actually just realized I have the first book and I didn't hold it up this entire time. I'm borrowing this from my mom because, so Kara sent this to my mom as a holiday gift. So thank you, Kara, for sending this. My mom really enjoyed it. My mom also like binged through this series back in December and like loved it. So those are all of the books that I read in February. I feel like I'm kind of on a roll with my reading. Like I feel like just having a bunch of very fun books kind of built up momentum, and I'm feeling good about reading in March. Hopefully I'm not jinxing myself by saying that, but I would love to know how your February reading has been going, and I hopefully will be posting more frequently now that I have like started my job and I'm starting to settle in more, and I feel like I have more mental space for reading and filming and editing and all of that. I hope to be on here more. Anyways, I'd love to hear about how your reading has been going. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.